It has been called the backbone of the German armed forces, with over 8,500 units produced between 1936 and 1945. The Panzer IV was the most widely manufactured and deployed German tank of the Second World War. It served in all German combat theatres, from the invasion of Poland in 1939 to the defensive battles in Germany in 1945. This is the story of the Panzer IV. The Panzer IV was originally conceived and produced in the mid-1930s as an infantry support tank. At the time, German military doctrine divided tanks into two main roles: infantry support tanks, which were meant to deal with enemy fortifications and infantry, and battle tanks, which were intended to engage and destroy enemy tanks. The Panzer III was designed to fulfill the latter role, while the Panzer IV, with its short-barreled 75mm gun capable of firing a high explosive round, was intended for the former. Its primary role was to support the infantry by engaging enemy fortifications, machine gun nests, and infantry formations. However, during Operation Barbarossa, the limitations of the Panzer III became increasingly apparent, particularly its inability to mount a gun capable of dealing with better armoured enemy tanks. On the other hand, the Panzer IV had a larger turret ring, which allowed it to be upgunned with a longer, more powerful 75mm gun, making it more effective against enemy tanks. The Panzer IV had several main variants, A to J, that were created throughout the war, each incorporating improvements and changes over the previous models. The Panzer IV's development began with the Alf A. Produced from October 1937 to March 1938, only 35 models were made, featuring a relatively modest 14.5mm of armour and a 75mm KWK-37L-24 gun, intended for infantry support. The subsequent variant, the Alf B, saw a production run from April to September 1938, with 42 units being made. This model focused on enhancing defences, increasing the frontal armour to 30mm for improved protection against anti-tank fire. Soon after, the Alf C was introduced in October 1938 and continued until August 1939. This version, with 134 units produced, boasted improvements to the engine and transmission, enhancing the tank's overall performance. The Alf D, produced from October 1939 to May 1941, saw further increases in armour, with the addition of 20mm plates to the hull and turret front. 229 units were built. The Alf E, with a production run from September 1940 to April 1941, marked another step in the Panzer IV's evolution. Changes included an increase in armour to 50mm and the introduction of a new transmission. A total of 223 units were made. The Alf F or F1, produced from April 1941 to March 1942, brought further enhancements. Among the 462 units built, armour upgrades were made, increasing the frontal armour to 60mm, and the tank was also fitted with wider tracks for better mobility. The Alf F2, later renamed G, was a significant advancement. Produced from March to July 1942 with 175 units made, this version introduced a new high-velocity 75mm KWK-40L-43 gun, greatly improving anti-tank performance. The production of the Alf G began in May 1942 and lasted until June 1943. Among the 1,687 units built, this variant introduced a new commander's cupola and the option for additional armour, further enhancing the defensive capabilities of the tank. The Alf H, produced from April 1943 to July 1944, took protection a step further. With 3,774 units made, this variant added side skirts, known as Schürzen, for added protection against anti-tank weapons, and upgraded to a more powerful 75mm KWK-40L-48 gun. The Alf J, the final production model, was produced from June 1944 to March 1945. A total of 1,758 units were built during this period. To speed up production amidst a demanding war, it featured a simplified construction process and eliminated the power traverse for the turret due to shortages. Despite the compromises, the Alf J remained a formidable fighting machine, marking the end of the Panzer IV's evolution. The Panzer IV's design proved versatile. spawning numerous specialised variants such as the Stern Panzer IV or Brummbär. This heavily armoured assault gun, produced from April 1943 to March 1945, was armed with a powerful 150mm STUH-43 L12 howitzer. Of these, 306 were built. In January 1944, the Germans introduced the Panzer IV. This tank destroyer version of the Panzer IV featured a low profile and a fixed casemate instead of a turret. Approximately 2,000 units were produced until production ceased in March 1945. Another variant was the Hummel, a self-propelled artillery piece. Produced from February 1943 to 1945, it was built on a slightly modified Panzer IV chassis and armed with a 150mm SFH-18-1 L30 howitzer. Approximately 714 units were built. The Nashorn, a tank destroyer armed with a potent 88mm gun, was also built on a modified Panzer IV chassis. It was produced from 1942 to 1945, and approximately 494 units were made. In response to the increasing air superiority of the Allies, the Germans developed the Wirbelwind and the Ostwind. These anti-aircraft versions of the Panzer IV were armed with rapid-fire flak cannons in an open-top turret. Finally, in the waning days of the war, the Kugelblitz emerged. This late-war prototype anti-aircraft tank was based on the Panzer IV. It featured a fully enclosed turret for better crew protection and was armed with twin 30mm autocannons. The Kugelblitz was a response to the need for a more effective mobile anti-aircraft weapon capable of keeping pace with panzer formations. However, it was developed late in the war, with only a few prototypes being built. The Panzer IV's legacy lies in its impact on tank design and military doctrine. It was among the first tanks to incorporate a three-man turret with a commander, gunner and loader. This arrangement allowed the commander to focus on maintaining situational awareness and directing the tank, rather than having to load or fire the gun, which was common practice in many tanks of the era. This design principle became standard in post-war tank designs. Following World War II, the Panzer IV saw extensive service in several nations' armed forces. Finland, for instance, received 15 Panzer IV Alfs Js from Germany in 1944. These were deployed against the Soviet Union in the Continuation War and remained in active service until the 1960s. Bulgaria, an ally of Germany during the war, continued to utilise the Panzer IVs until at least the 1950s. Meanwhile, Spain had procured around 20 Panzer IVs in 1943, keeping them in operational use until late 1950s. A decade later, many of these tanks found new life as museum pieces or monuments. Similarly, Turkey maintained a fleet of 46 Panzer IVs received from Germany during the war, in active duty until the 1950s. Post-war, the Norwegian army briefly used a small number of Panzer IVs until they were supplanted by British and American tanks. In a distinct case, Syria obtained approximately 60 Panzer IVs from France and Czechoslovakia in the 1950s, marking one of the last combat uses of the Panzer IV. These tanks saw action in the 1967 Six-Day War against Israel. If you enjoyed that, could you please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.